Black woman was fired for feeding a veteran. Then 4 U.S. Marines walked into the cafe. The moment the door slammed behind her, Simone Carter knew her life had changed. Not because she had finally quit the job she hated, but because she had just been fired for giving a homeless veteran a sandwich. Simone, you just can't give away food. Company policy. Doesn't matter if the guy served in the Marines or in space, her manager had sneered minutes earlier, his voice loud enough for customers to hear. That man, the same veteran she had quietly handed a bagged lunch to behind the counter, was now sitting on the curb, watching with hollow eyes as Simone walked out, clutching a plastic bag with her apron and last paycheck. But no one expected what would happen next, because the door hadn't even cooled from closing behind her when a black SUV pulled into the parking lot, and out stepped 4 sharply dressed men in civilian clothes. They moved with precision, with the quiet authority that only comes from time in the military. The way they surveyed the cafe, heads turning, shoulders squared, eyes laser-sharp. It was clear they weren't here for coffee. Simone barely had time to register what was happening before one of the men, tall, bald, black, with an insignia tattoo peeking from his collar, walked up to the front door and opened it. "Where's the manager?" he said, loud and clear. Inside, her former manager, Greg Mathers, stood frozen behind the counter. The man didn't wait for a reply. "I'm Master Sergeant Anthony Willis, and the man you just humiliated? That's Corporal Daniel Harper, my friend, my brother-in-arms, served 2 tours with me in Fallujah." Greg's smirk faded. I didn't know. I thought he was just a bum?" Another Marine stepped forward, this one Latino, built like a tank. "You thought wrong. You judged a decorated Marine based on his boots and beard. While he's been sleeping outside, you've been what? Guarding muffins?" Customers had gone silent. Phones were already out. A few were recording, pretending to sip coffee, but clearly anticipating a viral moment. Anthony turned to the crowd. "Anyone here see what happened earlier?" A teenage girl at a nearby table raised her hand nervously. The woman, Simone. She gave him food, quietly, didn't make a scene. Then the manager started yelling, called her insubordinate, fired her. "Thank you," Anthony said, his voice warm now. He turned to Greg. "You don't deserve employees like her." Then, turning to the cafe owner, who had walked in from the back, visibly confused, he added, "You might want to check the cameras, or your reviews, because this is going public." Simone stood outside, still stunned. Then the glass door swung open. "Miss Carter," Anthony said, approaching her with quiet respect, "I'd like to talk. If you'll let me." Her voice cracked. "You know my name. We know everything. Marines look out for their own. And you, ma'am, just did more for Daniel than most people have in months." He held out a business card. "We run a foundation, jobs for veterans, and for those who stand with them. We could use someone like you." She stared at the card, her heart pounding. Greg was now out front too, his face red. "This is crazy. You can't just—" Anthony raised a hand. "You've done enough." Greg turned to Simone, his voice laced with panic. "You know I didn't mean it like that. Maybe if you come back in, we can talk." "No," she said firmly. "You made it clear who I am to you. I'd rather work for people who don't need a uniform to recognize humanity." The cafe door shut behind her again, but this time it felt different, empowering. As she walked away, flanked by 4 Marines who had come not just for coffee but for justice, Simone realized something. The world may be full of people like Greg, but sometimes, just sometimes, the right ones step in. And when they do, everything changes. She looked back once, saw Daniel still on the curb, smiling now, his eyes no longer hollow. For the first time in weeks, he stood up, not just to his feet, but tall, proud. Simone smiled, blinking back tears. This wasn't just about a sandwich. It was about dignity. And this was just the beginning. The diner was silent the next morning, unnaturally so. Usually the place buzzed with the low hum of coffee orders and clinking plates. But today something had shifted. The usual rhythm was gone, and in its place was tension so thick it could be sliced with a butter knife. Inside the manager's office, Greg paced like a cornered animal. His phone lit up again. Another missed call from the district manager. Another message from corporate PR, and a dozen notifications from Yelp, each new review dragging his name further into the dirt. Rude to veterans. Fired the only person with compassion. Never reading here again. It wasn't just online. A local news van was parked outside. A couple of reporters were trying to coax interviews from customers, and a woman with a service dog stood near the curb holding a cardboard sign that read, "Feed people, not policies." Greg slammed the door shut and slumped in his chair. This wasn't just a PR problem anymore. It was a crisis, and he knew exactly where it started. Simone Carter. He picked up his phone, scrolled through his contacts, and hesitated. Then he pressed call. "Hey, Simone, it's Greg. Look, I think things got out of hand yesterday. I wanted to see if we could talk. Maybe meet?" Her voice on the other end was calm but cold. "Talk? You mean now that the world's watching?" "I just think we need to clear the air." "Clear the air," she echoed. "You humiliated me in front of a room full of strangers, called me insubordinate for feeding someone who fought for this country, and now you want to clear the air?" He paused. "I made a mistake." "No, Greg. You followed a rule that didn't need enforcing. There's a difference." She hung up. Greg stared at the phone in disbelief. He wasn't used to losing control, especially not to someone like her. Meanwhile, across town, Simone sat on the worn-out couch in her small apartment, scrolling through messages. Her phone was overflowing with notifications. People she hadn't spoken to in years, strangers offering encouragement, a few job offers, and a message from a name she didn't recognize. Rena Jackson, retired Marine Corps captain. She opened it. "Simone, I saw the video. You reminded people what real service looks like. I run a nonprofit that partners with veteran-run businesses. We're hiring. Let's talk." She blinked, heart pounding. This wasn't what she expected. She had spent the last 24 hours going from shame and anger to doubt and exhaustion. But now, people were calling her brave, principled, a hero. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Daniel, the same veteran she had fed that day. But this time he didn't look lost or sunken. He was clean-shaven, wearing a crisp polo shirt and slacks, still thin but upright, present. "Hey," he said sheepishly. "I hope it's okay I came." She smiled and stepped aside. "Of course it is." He handed her a paper bag. "Chicken salad sandwich." "Thought it was my turn to treat you," she laughed. "Wow, you remembered my favorite." "I remember people who see me. Most don't." They sat on the couch, the silence between them easy, not strained. After a moment, he said, "Those men yesterday, the Marines, they weren't just old friends. One of them, Master Sergeant Willis, he got me out of some dark places after I came back. But even he didn't know how bad things had gotten." Simone looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I disappeared," Daniel said, staring at the floor. "Stopped answering calls, moved shelter to shelter. You didn't know me, but you saw me. That moment changed more than just my stomach." Simone swallowed hard. Her eyes welled. "I don't know what's coming next," she said quietly. "But I'm starting to think maybe this was never about a job." "It never was," Daniel said. "It's about dignity." That night, a clip of her firing went viral. Again. but this time stitched with a local news segment showing Simone at a community center, serving meals beside Marines and veterans. The caption read, "She lost her job, found her purpose." At the cafe, Greg stared at the TV in the break room, watching her face beam on screen while a crowd cheered behind her. His phone buzzed again. This time it was corporate. "Greg," the voice on the other end said, "we need to talk about your future with the company." He didn't reply, because deep down he knew the truth. The moment he fired Simone Carter, he hadn't just lost an employee. He lost everything that made his cafe worth walking into. The sun hadn't fully risen when Simone's inbox pinged with a new message. The subject line read, "Invitation, honoring service and compassion. Veterans Outreach Initiative." She opened it hesitantly, expecting another corporate apology or media request. But it was a formal invitation from a coalition of veteran groups asking her to speak at a community fundraiser that weekend. "You probably didn't know what your small act meant," the email read, "but you reminded a lot of us that humanity still exists. We'd be honored if you'd join us." Simone sat on her bed, blinking at the screen. She wasn't used to being the center of anything, let alone gratitude on a public stage. But something in her chest stirred. This wasn't about attention. It was about standing up for something that mattered. Downstairs, her neighbor, Mrs. Jennings, knocked with a fresh cup of coffee. "I saw you on the news again, Sugar. You looked fierce." Simone laughed. "Is that good or bad?" "Good. We need fierce. You made folks uncomfortable, and that means you hit a nerve." She appreciated the support, but it also came with the weight of expectation. This wasn't just a story anymore. It was a movement. Back at the diner, Greg's world continued to spiral. Corporate had sent in a regional manager, Lisa, who wasted no time reviewing customer complaints, employee reports, and security footage. She sat him down that morning in the break room, lips pursed, folder in hand. "Let's talk about why half your staff wants to quit, why our Yelp rating dropped 2 stars in 48 hours, and why the phrase heartless corporate diner is now trending." "I followed policy," Greg insisted. "Then the policy's broken," Lisa shot back. "And I'm not sure you're the guy to fix it." Before he could respond, the bell over the door rang. A deep, commanding voice echoed across the cafe. "Morning, we're here to talk." Greg stepped out into the dining area and froze. 4 uniformed Marines stood in formation near the counter. One of them, tall, bald, with a scar running across his temple, stepped forward. "My name is Master Sergeant Trent Willis. We served with Daniel." The room went silent. Greg stammered. I didn't know he was connected to anyone." "You didn't bother to ask," Trent replied. "That man you tossed aside, he served 3 tours, saved lives, lost everything when he came home." A shorter Marine stepped up. "And the woman who fed him? She didn't see a homeless Eki. She saw a brother in arms." Greg looked around, suddenly aware of all the eyes on him. Customers, staff, even the cook in the kitchen. And for the first time, shame crept up his spine. "What do you want from me?" he asked. Trent's tone was even but firm. An apology, not just to Simone, but to every veteran who watched that footage and saw themselves being told they didn't matter. Greg swallowed hard. "You want me to go public?" Trent didn't blink. "We want accountability." Simone didn't hear about the confrontation until later that afternoon, when Daniel showed up at her door again, this time with news. "They went to the Café," he said, smiling. "The guys. They confronted Greg." Her eyes widened. "They what?" "Told him he needed to own what he did. And guess what? News picked it up. Again." He handed her his phone. A new video was circulating online. Marines show up for one of their own. Manager confronted over firing cafe worker. The comments were exploding. People weren't just supporting her, they were demanding justice. Some were calling for Greg's resignation, others were sharing stories of kindness that reminded them of what Simone did. As she watched the clip, something inside her clicked. This wasn't about her anymore. It was bigger. Later that night, she stood on the small stage at the Veterans Fundraiser. The gymnasium was packed, the air buzzing with anticipation. She cleared her throat and stepped to the mic. "My name is Simone Carter. I used to work at a diner. I was fired for feeding a veteran." The crowd murmured. "But what I really did that day," she continued, "was refuse to ignore someone's humanity. That shouldn't be controversial. That should be the standard." She paused, her voice steady but impassioned. "Policies without compassion fail us, so I say this to anyone listening. If you're ever forced to choose between rules and doing what's right, choose people." The room erupted in applause. Outside, under the night sky, Trent caught up with her. "You ever think about joining a mission bigger than a diner?" She smirked. "What kind of mission?" He handed her a card. "Veterans Rising. Director of Community Engagement. Vacant." "You already started it," he said. "Might as well lead it." She looked down at the card, heart racing. Not long ago, she had been pouring coffee for tips. Now she was being offered a seat at a table that actually mattered. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to hope. And she knew deep down this was only the beginning. Greg sat alone in the back booth of the cafe, nervously watching the front door like it might suddenly burst open again. Ever since the Marines showed up, the place hadn't felt the same. Half his regular customers had stopped coming in, the local news had run the story on a loop, and his district manager, Lisa, was now camped in his office more often than her own. The worst part. Every time he passed by Simone's old locker in the back, still with her name scratched on the corner, guilt jabbed at him. But he wasn't ready to admit he'd made a mistake. Not yet, not publicly. He just wanted the storm to pass. Meanwhile, across town, Simone stood in front of a small group of high school students at a local community center. It was supposed to be a quiet volunteer gig, helping with food prep for an after-school program. But one of the organizers had recognized her and asked her to say a few words. She was reluctant, but the kids were curious, so she shared a bit of what happened. One girl raised her hand. "Were you scared when you stood up for that man?" Simone smiled, then shook her head slowly. "I wasn't scared until afterward. In that moment, I was just doing what felt right. Sometimes the right thing is the hardest thing." Another boy piped up. "Did they ever apologize?" "No," she said softly, "but that's not why I did it." Afterward, one of the center volunteers, a woman named Carla, pulled her aside. "You know," Carla said, "you've got a gift. You speak from the gut. Ever think of taking this further?" Simone laughed. "Like what? Motivational speeches?" Carla shrugged. "Why not? People are listening." Later that night, Simone met Daniel at a small diner near the edge of town. Not the one she used to work at. This one felt warmer, run by a second-generation Korean-American family who greeted Daniel by name and brought Simone a steaming bowl of spicy kimchi stew without her even ordering. "Thought you might need comfort food," Daniel said with a grin. She took a spoonful and let the warmth settle in. "It's been a weird week." "Yeah," he replied, "but you're handling it like a pro." He paused for a moment. "They offered me a spot in a new housing program. One of the Marines called in a favor. Said I'm on the list for permanent housing downtown." Simone's eyes widened. "Daniel, that's incredible." "I wanted you to be the first to know," he said. "None of it would have happened without you." Before she could reply, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Lisa, the regional manager. "Hi, Simone, can we talk? I believe an apology is long overdue. Also, we're reviewing management at the cafe. Would you be open to a meeting?" Simone stared at the screen. "You're not going to believe this," she said, showing it to Daniel. He read it and raised an eyebrow. "She wants to talk?" "She's probably just trying to control the PR fallout," Simone said. "Maybe. Or maybe someone finally pulled her aside and reminded her what leadership actually looks like." Simone didn't answer right away. Her mind was buzzing. Part of her wanted to ignore the message, but another part, maybe the part that wasn't done fighting, wanted to hear what Lisa had to say. The next morning she agreed to meet Lisa at a neutral spot, a quiet co-working lounge in Midtown. The two women sat across from each other, the hum of laptops and quiet conversations filling the space around them. "I'm not here to ask you to come back," Lisa began. "Though honestly, I wish we'd handled things differently." Simone folded her arms. "You fired me for showing compassion. That's not just bad optics, that's bad humanity." Lisa nodded. "You're right. Greg made the decision, but we enabled it. And for that, I'm sorry." Simone's eyes narrowed. "So why the meeting?" Lisa took a breath. "Because the board saw the news coverage. They've been discussing a new role, a position focused on ethics and community engagement. It's still in the early stages, but we want someone like you helping shape it." Simone was caught off guard. "Let me get this straight. You want me to work for the same company that fired me?" "I want you to help change it," Lisa said, "from the inside." Simone stared out the window. It would be so easy to say no, to walk away and let the place burn. But maybe change didn't come from the outside yelling in. It came from the inside, refusing to stay silent. "I'll think about it," she said finally. As she left the meeting, the city buzzed around her. Everything felt surreal. Only a week ago, she was scraping by, invisible. Now she had Marines backing her, news outlets quoting her, and corporations wanting her input. Back at home, she sat on her balcony, the late afternoon sun washing over her. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a photo. Daniel in front of a small apartment complex, holding keys and smiling ear to ear. Home. Finally. Simone smiled. One win at a time. One life changed, and maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something even bigger. It was raining hard the morning Simone decided to walk back into the cafe, not as an employee, but as a woman with a voice. She hadn't set foot near the place since being fired, but the quiet message from Lisa and the news of Daniel's new home had stirred something inside her. A fire she thought had been extinguished. Greg was behind the counter, pale and jittery, eyes darting toward the door every time it creaked open. Business had been dying steadily. Yelp reviews turned brutal. Local veterans groups had staged sit-ins. And the 4 Marines who had come to her defense? They didn't stop there. One of them, Sergeant McClellan, had launched a campaign online. Feed dignity, not policy. It was gaining traction fast. That morning, the cafe was nearly empty, except for one reporter with a notepad and 2 elderly women sipping coffee in silence. Simone didn't come alone. She brought Carla, the volunteer from the community center, and an unexpected ally. Marcus Ford, a local city councilman and retired Navy officer who had taken interest in her case after hearing Daniel's story. The 3 of them stepped inside, heads high. Greg spotted them and visibly tensed. "I don't think this is a good idea," he said quickly, stepping from behind the counter. "We're not here to fight," Simone replied calmly, "but we're not here to disappear either." Greg shifted, glancing at the reporter who was now leaning forward with interest. "Look, I already said I regret how things were handled." "No, you said that in private," Marcus interrupted, voice low and firm. "What you did was public. Firing a woman for feeding a hungry veteran isn't just a management error, it's a moral failure." The tension in the room thickened. Carla stepped forward. You think this is just about Simone? She said. You think it stops at one veteran and one black woman trying to do the right thing. This is about how you treat people, all people. Greg looked ready to melt into the floor. We're under new review. Corporate is too little too late, Simone said. But we're not just here to drag you through the mud. We're here to offer a way forward. Greg blinked. What? Marcus pulled out a folded document from his coat pocket. We're proposing a community partnership program. You want to rebuild trust. Start by feeding veterans once a week. Partner with local shelters. Give employees the right to make human decisions. Real ones. Greg looked stunned. And what do you want from me? Simone looked around the place, the cracked menu boards, the dusty corner where she used to refill napkins. The ghosts of her last shift still haunted this space. I want you to admit that what happened was wrong, she said, not just to me, but to every person who's ever been treated like their kindness was a liability. Greg nodded slowly. All right, he said. You'll get your statement. And the program, if corporate signs off, I'll push for it. As they stepped out into the rain again, Carla turned to Simone. You sure you don't want your job back? Simone shook her head. I'm not meant to be behind the counter anymore, but I am meant to make noise. That afternoon, Simone's phone rang. She recognized the number. It was Sergeant McClellan. Hey, he said, his voice light with restrained energy. You got a few minutes? There's someone who wants to meet you. He didn't give details, only told her to meet them at a local community gym. When she arrived, the door creaked open and inside stood not just McClellan, but all 4 Marines who had walked into the cafe that day. Alongside them were 2 women in uniform and an older man in a neatly pressed suit with the Department of Defense badge clipped to his breast pocket. Simone blinked. Okay, what is this? McClellan smiled. You're not going to believe this. Turns out someone at the Pentagon heard your story, and they're looking for someone to lead a new civilian initiative, veterans reintegration and community advocacy. One of the uniformed women stepped forward. It's an advisory role. You'd be shaping real policy from the ground up. Simone's heart skipped. I'm not military. You are the reason 4 Marines walked into a diner and made America look at itself in the mirror, the woman said. That's more than enough. Simone sat on a nearby bench, breathless. Is this real? As real as it gets, McClellan said. You said you wanted to make noise. This is how you turn it into change. Simone looked down at her hands, hands that once poured coffee, wiped counters, fed someone who needed it. Now those same hands had opened doors she never imagined. She finally looked up. Then let's make it count. The soft chime above the cafe door had never felt louder. Simone stood frozen just inside, dressed not in her apron, but a crisp navy blue blazer, one that fit her now elevated role perfectly. She had agreed to return to the cafe for a live town hall event, organized after her story had gone viral, and the city's Office of Veteran Affairs officially recognized her as a civic advocate. The place was packed. Reporters, local residents, veterans, students, even cafe employees from nearby branches who had walked off the job in solidarity. At the center of it all stood Greg, the man who had fired her, looking paler than ever, adjusting his collar as he glanced toward Simone with unease. I didn't think you'd come back, he muttered as she approached. I didn't come back for you, she said softly. I came back for them. At that, she turned to the crowd and stepped onto the makeshift stage, a platform of repurposed milk crates stacked by a group of young volunteers. Microphones were clipped, lights angled, and silence fell. Simone began. 10 weeks ago, I handed a plate of food to a hungry man. That's it. No media attention, no cameras, just one moment between two people, and it cost me my job. Her voice didn't shake. Her eyes scanned the room, landing momentarily on Daniel, now standing beside Sergeant McClellan and the other Marines. But what happened after that? That wasn't just about me. It was about every person who's ever been told that doing the right thing makes them expendable. About every veteran who's come home and felt invisible. About every black woman who's been told to stay quiet, smile politely, and move along. Applause erupted. A few people stood. Greg remained seated, face unreadable. Simone continued, her tone firmer now. When policy overrides humanity, we don't just lose good employees, we lose our souls. So today, we're not here to reopen a wound. We're here to build something better. She nodded toward Marcus Ford, who stepped forward with a binder in hand. We're introducing the Community Compassion Initiative, he said. A new policy pilot that empowers Café staff across the city to offer assistance without punishment. With Simone's leadership, this model could expand statewide. The proposal was met with a thunderous response, people clapping, cheering, some even teary-eyed. Then, just as Simone was about to step down, a hand shot up from the crowd. It was an elderly woman in a red scarf, standing beside her teenage grandson. My husband was fed by this woman that day, she said, voice trembling. I wasn't sure who it was at first, but he came home that night with more than food. He came home with dignity, and I want to say thank you, face to face. Simone descended from the platform and walked to her. They embraced, long, honest, raw. That hug changed the air in the room, but the twist came just after. A tall, silver-haired man stepped forward near the back. He wore a dark wool coat and carried an air of quiet authority. A few heads turned. Whispers began. He introduced himself calmly. My name is Colonel Raymond Elias, U.S. Marine Corps, retired. I served 28 years, oversaw multiple domestic initiatives, and I've been watching this story unfold. Simone's brow furrowed slightly. She didn't recognize him. You see, he went on, while everyone was asking if feeding a veteran was worth losing a job, I was asking a different question. How do we make sure the next Simone doesn't have to choose? He paused, then reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. Ms. Simone Brooks, he said, I'm here on behalf of the Department of Defense's Civilian Support Unit. We'd like to formally offer you a newly created role, Director of Veteran Community Integration. You'd work directly with cities, veterans, and small businesses to make what you did, what came so naturally, standard practice. Gasps. Phones came up. Someone cried out, Yes! Simone didn't move at first. Her hand slowly reached for the envelope, eyes never leaving his. I don't need to think about it, she said. Let's do it. Even Greg clapped then. Hesitant at first, but real. He looked over at Lisa, who gave him a subtle nod. That evening, after the crowd dispersed and the cafe emptied, Simone stood in front of the now faded chalkboard where she used to write the soup of the day. She picked up a piece of chalk, wrote something quick and simple, and walked away. When Greg came over later, he read the message left behind. Kindness is policy now. The media storm didn't die down after Simone accepted the new role. It intensified. Her name trended for days. Hashtags like #Justice for Simone and #FeedWithDignity flooded every platform. But with the national spotlight came scrutiny. Supporters praised her strength, but detractors whispered, she only got that role because she went viral. Some called her an opportunist, others questioned her qualifications. Simone read them all in silence. Still, she showed up, every day. The first trial of her new position wasn't in a fancy office or a boardroom. It was back on the streets, visiting local cafes across the city. The first was in a rougher neighborhood near downtown Boston. The manager, a balding man named Curtis, greeted her with folded arms. "I read the policy you sent," he said flatly. "I'm not sure we're in the business of free handouts." "We're not," Simone replied. "We're in the business of community. And sometimes that means feeding someone who served this country when they're at their lowest." Curtis didn't look convinced. Just then, a young woman in an apron stepped from the kitchen, her eyes wide. "Wait, are you Simone Brooks?" Simone turned. "Yes." The woman rushed over. "My dad. He served 2 tours in Iraq. He struggles with PTSD. You're the only reason he walked back into a cafe last week. He said if someone like you cared enough to feed a stranger, maybe the world hadn't forgotten him." Curtis said nothing, but he turned back into the cafe and left the door open behind him. A subtle sign. She was welcome to continue. Simone kept going. Every meeting, every visit, every story she collected made the mission more personal. Until one afternoon, during a roundtable session in D.C., came the twist she hadn't expected. A man stood up in the back row, clean-cut, early 30s, wearing a suit slightly too big. He cleared his throat. "Miss Brooks, I think you fed my father that day." Simone froze. The man walked forward, holding a small laminated photo. "This is my dad, Richard Mathers. He was homeless, disappeared for years. You gave him food and then he came home." He paused, eyes glassy. "He passed away 2 weeks later, cancer. But he spent his last days with his family. Because of you." Silence. Simone stepped off the stage and met him halfway. "I remember him," she whispered. "He was kind, gentle. He told me he used to be someone. I told him he still was." The man laughed through his tears. "He talked about that moment every night. You reminded him of his worth, and I wanted to thank you for giving my dad a second chance to be seen." They hugged. No cameras, no lights. Just 2 strangers who had met through an act of humanity. Later that night, Simone sat in her hotel room, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Not the woman who once wore an apron and took orders, not even the advocate who stood in rooms with generals and policymakers, but a woman who, with a single act, had changed more than one life, and in turn was changed herself. Then came the knock. When she opened the door, there stood Sergeant McClellan, flanked by the 3 Marines who had walked into the cafe that day. "We've been following your work," McClellan said. "We've got something to show you." They led her to a community center a few blocks away, where a mural had just been unveiled. Painted across the side of the building was a scene. Simone handing a plate of food to a weary veteran, while 4 Marines stood behind her, arms crossed, not as saviors but as allies. Underneath it, in bold white letters, were the words, "Compassion is the highest form of strength." Simone blinked away tears. "That's not just about me," she said quietly. "No," McClellan replied. "It's about all of us. But you reminded us what it looks like." The cafe where it all began had changed. What was once a quiet, forgettable spot on the corner of 10th and Maple was now called Honor Grounds, a name chosen by the community. The windows displayed photos of veterans, local heroes, and above the front door hung a brass plaque, in gratitude to those who served and those who serve with heart. Inside, Simone Brooks stood behind the counter, not as a barista, but as the keynote guest of a community rededication event. Cameras flashed, reporters lingered, but her focus was on the people gathered. Veterans in worn jackets, single mothers with kids, cafe staff in crisp uniforms, and a few Marines who had now become family. Councilwoman Deirdre Hall stepped up to the mic. "Months ago, a woman was fired from this very cafe for feeding a hungry veteran. Today we rename this place to honor that act and everything that followed. Simone Brooks, would you join us? Applause thundered as Simone approached, but her hands shook. She looked around. In the front row sat Henry, the very veteran she'd fed that day. His cheeks were fuller now, his eyes brighter. Behind him sat Sergeant McClellan and the 3 Marines, each standing tall in dress blues. Simone took the mic, breathed in, and began. I didn't feed Henry because I wanted to make a point. I didn't do it for recognition, or justice, or to spark a movement. I did it because he was hungry, because he reminded me of my father, because sometimes the rules don't make sense when a human being is sitting in front of you, forgotten. She paused. And for that, I lost my job. A soft murmur swept the crowd. But what I gained is more than I ever expected. She gestured toward the audience. I gained community. I gained the support of people who still believe kindness matters. I gained strength I didn't know I had. And I gained clarity. We are all responsible for the dignity of others. There was a silence that settled over the crowd, not heavy, but respectful. Then she added, voice steady, and I'm proud to announce, starting next month, Honor Grounds will expand its mission. With funding from the Veterans Initiative, we'll open 5 more locations, each dedicated to employing, feeding, and supporting veterans in need. This isn't just a cafe, it's a promise. Gasps and cheers filled the room. Someone stood in the back, clapping slowly. It was Ethan Graves, the former district manager. He looked thinner, more worn down, but his presence drew immediate tension. Security shifted uneasily until Simone raised a hand. I invited him, she said calmly. Ethan stepped forward. I didn't come to defend what I did. I came to say I was wrong. I let policies outweigh people. I judged too quickly. And I'm not asking for forgiveness, just a chance to help rebuild. Simone studied him. The silence was long, deliberate. Then she extended her hand. You want to help? Prove it. There's a veterans kitchen in Dorchester that needs extra hands. Be there Monday. Ethan nodded, his eyes glassy. I will. The applause that followed wasn't for his redemption. It was for her grace. As the sun dipped below the Boston skyline, Simone stood outside Honor Grounds watching the last of the crowd trickle away. A small boy approached her, tugging on her coat. Are you the lady who gave that soldier food? She knelt. Yeah, that was me. The boy smiled wide. My uncle's a Marine. I'm gonna tell him you're my hero. She chuckled, ruffling his curls. Tell your uncle thank you for his service. When the boy ran off, Simone stood still for a moment, letting it all wash over her. The fight, the fear, the fire. It had all led here. And though she never asked to be a symbol, she'd become one. A quiet voice broke the silence. You were never just a barista, Henry said, stepping beside her. You were a mirror. You reminded us who we used to be, and who we still can be. Simone looked up at the glowing sign above them and nodded. Then let's make sure no one forgets again. If this story moved you, if you believe in second chances, dignity, and standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter. And remember, sometimes a small act of kindness is the spark that sets a whole system ablaze. Let's be that spark.